Hi everyone, and welcome inside the CrossFit gym in Scotts Valley. We're here with Dave Castro, the General Manager of Sport of the CrossFit Games, and we're on the second series of a three-part series diving into what the CrossFit Games season is going to look like this year. This time we're going to talk about the semifinals and the last chance qualifiers. So Dave, are the semifinals basically a variation of regionals?
The semifinals are regionals and sanctionals kind of combined, taking the best of both worlds and bringing them together. We learned a lot through both phases. We obviously ran regionals for a very long time, and then we had sanctionals for the past couple years. And we listened to athletes, we listened to the event organizers, we listened to our partners, and there was positives with all of them, with both. And there were some really strong pieces with the sanctionals and some strong pieces with the regionals. One of the things that was really important when creating this season was kind of bringing everything back into a timeline that had for the CrossFit Games, that had a start, the open, and an end, the games. The way it was the past couple of years, we had events all outside of that, and it was kind of chaotic and messy. So bringing everything back was important. Another thing that was really important, and this is one thing that the regionals captured that I thought was a huge priority to kind of go forward with and keep, was kind of this area, this regional, this representation for pieces of the world. And regionals, basically what that got you was people from different parts of the world were able to compete and be represented at the games. To an extreme, country champions did that, but that was so far to the opposite end of the spectrum, where you had people at the games who necessarily didn't belong at the games. But when you go back to like a regional format, they still had to, for a given area, earn their way to the games against against the cohort from that same region. So therefore, I felt it was really important that people from Asia, Africa, South America, even though they're not at the level of some of the people from Europe and North America, should still have the ability to send some people to the games. In a sanctional model, the way it was run the last couple of years, that could be completely lost. Although, all that being said, I initially looked at regionals and thought, is this something we want to go back to? And the answer was no. And here's why. Every few years, we were rewriting the lines and recreating what the boundaries were for the regionals. So
meaning the geographic regions?
Yes, exactly. And you've been around long enough to know that, like, yeah, every couple of years they had changed, and they were constantly changing, and they would continue to change based off of the number of people in the sport and participating. So therefore, somehow came across the idea of using continents. So continental boundaries are established already and kind of accepted as a norm throughout society and throughout the world. And so I thought, well, how could we use continent lines and never redraw them and never change anything up and just stay true to that? So we looked at the continents: North America, Africa, Europe, Asia, South America. Antarctica is not going to get representation at the games. And from there, figured out how could we make a system like that work. Then we took a look at the numbers of participants for each of these areas in our last open. And for example, North America, again, had about 130,000 people represented for that continent. And when I say North America, it's Canada, obviously Mexico, and then a number of the islands, the US. Europe had about 66,000 people represented. So those were the two big areas for representation. Then I kind of used a chart, came up with some numbers, and decided, well, based off of participation numbers, and that's what we're gonna do going forward. We're gonna preserve this, and we're gonna base the number of events we have and the number of people who go to the games for a given area based off of participation, based off of data. Based off of participation numbers, we came up with, well, North America should maybe get 4 qualifying events. We had a couple different models, one that had 5. Because of COVID and all the things going on, we're going to kind of scale back and start a little more conservatively. So we're giving North America 4 semifinal events. Europe, the next big country, using the same sort of math and formula, so it's not just like we pulled something out of a hat, but we're actually using numbers, is going to end up having 2 events. And now all of these other areas, they're all going to get 1 semifinal. And so, you know, you look at Africa, to use that example, Again, it only had 4,000 or 5,000 people participate in our last Open, way less than everywhere else. But again, for this idea of representation for specific parts of the world, we still believe they should have an event. So for semifinals, based off of what I just discussed, we have 10 events.
Although I'm counting 9.
You're right. Okay, so therefore, I'm missing Oceania, which includes, which is Australia and some of those. Oceania.
Got it.
Some of those areas. So there we go.
There's one.
Now we have 10 semifinal events. And now here's the way the quarterfinals play into this. And this is really important, really for Europe and North America, but I'll get into the others too. So 10% of the athletes from the Open, the top 10% in North America, qualify onto quarterfinals. And then from that cohort, let's say it's 13,000 people. Mm-hmm. For these 4 events, there is 120 spots. There are 120 spots to qualify for these 4 events. So from these 13,000, the quarterfinals are going to take the top 120, which looks like actually 4 events of 30 people each.
And that would be 30 males, 30 females.
Yep, and 30 teams. Actually,
and 30 teams.
For teams, we are doing 20 teams, 2 quarterfinals.
Got it.
I'm sorry, 2 semifinals. So 120 athletes from this pool qualify for 4. And here's one of the cool things that we're doing that plays off of what we learned from sanctionals and listening to the community and listening to the athletes. And this is where we have a lot of flexibility to grow because we're not using regionals, because it is continental based. What's happening here is there's 4 events in North America and the athletes get to choose which of the 4 events they want to go to. So the athlete will have, so when Matt wins and he takes number 1 out of this 120, he gets first choice to whichever one of the 4 events he wants to go to. If an athlete finishes 119th or 120th, we'll still give them the option to choose, but by that point the events might be filled already,
right.
So they might have to go to a different event. And so they're going to have some say in which of the 4 they want to compete. In Europe, so using this same math, it looks like 60 athletes, and then they are, so 60 out of quarterfinals, and then 30 and 30. For Asia, South America, Africa, and Oceania, there's one event they're qualifying. So in the quarterfinals, they're qualifying. The top 30 are going to these events.
And then how many spots of those 30 will each semifinal send forward?
So for the North American events, it's 5 spots.
So 5 men, 5 women, 5 teams
yes.
go forward
yes.
to the games.
Yes. For the European events, it's also 5. For the Oceania event, it's actually 3.
Okay.
And for the Africa, Asia, and South America, let me look at my notes. Yes, it is also, hold on one second. For South America, it is 2 individuals. For Asia, it is 2. And for Africa, it is 1. And again, so these numbers here, so 5 per event, 3, 1, 2, 2, also 5 per event. These, again, were all based off of the foundations of the numbers from the last Open. So it's all fair and equitable when you look at the board that we use to create this and the system we use. These numbers, we're not saying, oh, let's give them 3 and let's just give them 1. No, there's a system behind this where it all makes sense.
Based on participation.
Based all on participation. Now, a natural question would be, well, how do we get more events? How does Oceania or how does Africa or how does anywhere on this list get more events, and how do we get more spots to the games?
Right.
The answer is simple.
More
participation.
Right.
The deeper the field goes, the more participants you have in any given continent or area, the more opportunities for events and opportunities for spots to the games you have. So this method and this model here is incredibly scalable, because you could see a scenario in the future, let's say 4 or 5 years down the road, where every one of these areas has, let's use this number, 130,000 people competing. And so every one of these areas has 4 events. And then every one of these areas has the same amount of, same spots to the games. Maybe at that point we'd play with the number of spots to the games,
right,
or have more cuts at the games. But a lot of ways to play with that. But this system here is solid when you peel it back and look at the numbers.
Right. So right now we're looking at 18 participants. We haven't even talked about the last-chance qualifiers. We'll get to that next. But right now we're looking at possibly 18 men, 18 women.
No, well, because it's 5 per event. So this is actually,
right.
This is actually 20. 20.
20, yep.
See,
per event.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it.
This would actually be 10.
So more similar to,
It ends up being 38.
Got it.
38
Thank
men
you.
and 38 women.
And teams?
38 teams also.
Excellent. Before we saw regionals that had a standard programming. Then we saw sanctionals where the programming was all over the board. What can we expect as far as programming goes and the semifinals?
Well, so that's a great question. With the semifinals, we're going to let them program, but we're going to give parameters and guidelines to their event to kind of stay within. We'll probably have some expectations, what that looks like, and this hasn't been laid out yet, but for example, you know, you have to have 2 or 3 couplets or triplets that are, one is 2 to 3 minutes long in duration, the other is 6 to 7, and maybe 1 chipper. And so like, so time domains are balanced, and then also we'll approve the programming. So we'll actively be leaned in and working with the semifinal organizers on that part of it.
Got it. So based off of that comment right there, when will you announce who the partners are for these semifinals? Because it sounds like you are not, CrossFit itself is not hosting these. You will have a hand in them, but it's others that will be hosting these semi-events.
Yep, so to use the previous model, the old sanctional director, or the old sanctionals, a lot of them will be the semifinals. And so we're currently in the process of picking and determining who's going to be those events. And there's a lot that goes into it. We're going back and forth with them, seeing interest, and a lot of them are interested in being involved, hopefully very soon. But I've been saying that for, it feels like, months now.
Well, there's a lot
to do. It's a slow process.
Right, right. Now, what will happen if there's a semifinals event on one of these continents and they can't run due to COVID?
That's a great question. So the way we look at it is there's a few tiers to it. The best case scenario is they can run their event and they can run it completely with fans, and that's what we'd all like to see. That's very unlikely.
Yeah.
Next case down is they can run their event with no spectators. That's a possibility. So some of these events might be able to do that. Some might not be able to, but we're there to support them if they do choose to go that route. And then you scale it down 1 layer deep, and then we have to just pull the event because things are shut down. If we do that, here's what's really cool. That cohort of athletes, so let's take one of these North American events. Let's say this is a North American event that is filled. There's 30 men and 30 women assigned to this event. And this one has to cancel, but these other 3 can go. Well, the athletes that were assigned to these will go to compete here. This one here that gets canceled, we will then program and have an online competition for those athletes to compete against each other. So these 30 men and these 30 women will compete against each other, kind of like stage 1 from their home or from their affiliate, and then they'll still get their 5 spots to advance. So there is a very likely scenario where that can be applied across every event.
But the good thing about that is if we're dealing with continents, then you're not dealing with the time zone element that you did have to deal with on some of the other sanctional events.
Mostly,
right.
Because there is a chance even with this, there could be a 3-hour gap. Like an East Coast athlete and a Pacific or a West Coast athlete might be slotted in the same event.
But we're not dealing with somebody going at 1 a.m.
exactly.
and somebody going at 8 a.m.
So there is a possibility in what I just described where 1 or 2 of events are happening and then the rest are not. But there's still going to be qualifying, advancing forward based off of their cohort that are, and so really that applies to these 2 events. It applies to them all because these athletes will compete against each other, these athletes will compete against each other, these athletes.
Got it. And it would just be in an online variation of the event. Excellent. Now, what if it was just an individual athlete that couldn't make it to one of these semifinal events due to a COVID travel restriction, which is also very likely at this point?
That athlete would roll forward to our last chance qualifier. And so new also to this year, which I'm really excited about. And again, this was like, when you look at the development and the way things went for the past few years, and the development of the sport, there's always been kind of this, you look at regionals when we had that, and sometimes athletes would miss it and be on the bubble by like a fraction of a second or one slip or one mistake, and everyone was always like, well, that athlete deserved to be there, and this is unfair and the system's flawed. Well, now we have what we're calling the last chance qualifier, which is an opportunity for all of those athletes who just were on the outside to give one more shot to advance forward. And so the example you use, that athlete would roll forward and participate in the, likely, that's one scenario we're looking at in the last chance qualifier. So everyone who finishes just outside of a qualifying spot advances to the last chance qualifier, which will be online and give those athletes a chance to advance forward. So and that will qualify 2 people, each gender. So at the games we'll have 40 and 40.
Got it. So that's just 2 participants will qualify from the last chance qualifiers, but did you give a number on how many per semifinal would qualify for the last chance qualifier?
Yeah, it's the top 3 outside of the qualifying positions.
Got it.
So in
6
North
through 8.
America, it's 6 through 8.
Got it.
In Africa, it's 2 through 4.
Got it. And that will be an online competition.
Yes.
The last chance qualifier, just one.
Yes, I'll tell you this much. The original model, and if the world goes back to normal next year, that will likely be, there'll be 2 of them, and they will be in-person events. Because I think that would be a very cool spectacle and a great event to have. And interestingly, it would be the first global in-person competition in the season before the games, which is kind of cool because it had representation from people from all around the world. So that's what I'd like to see with it, but this year, I mean, what we're trying to do here is super aggressive, considering what's going on with COVID and considering what's going on in the world. But we're still going to try it, and we're going to try it because we have a good backup plan.
I think that's what's important. I'm glad that you guys are kind of shooting for the stars with a contingency plan. I think you guys obviously did a really good job with stage 1 last year. So I have no doubt that if you have to go to the contingency plan, it will work. When do you expect to release the rules of both the semifinals and the last chance qualifiers?
Hopefully very soon. So this is we're kind of just driving our team and trying to, there's still this has been moving so fast and there's so many different aspects to it all that there's a lot of questions we haven't answered. There's a lot of the pieces to this that have questions that need answering by the team, details, and all of this is very different than how we've done it in the past, and we moved very quickly on it. And it was it's a really aggressive concept, and especially when you start looking at all the different divisions going on from the open and just, all these additional stages of online competition, it's moving quickly, and so there's a lot of pieces that have to be resolved and figured out, and we're still in that.
I would say that for me, this is somewhat reminiscent, though, of regionals, and I think I probably speak for a lot of people when I say regionals is one of the funnest times in the season of the CrossFit Games. So to see something that's reminiscent of it, I'm really excited to see it.
And so one of the big things I wanted to bring up, another fundamental reason why this was so important, was because if you take out this kind of format and go back to a sanctional format where people can go anywhere around the world to qualify, I believe it's really unfair to the affiliates, actually, because how does an affiliate team who is good enough to go to an event qualify for these events all around the world that aren't consolidated in an area, that don't give them a focus point? With this model, all the affiliates in South America know they're trying to qualify for an event in South America. The North American affiliates, there's probably going to be an area somewhere near them that an event they're qualifying. So one of the big things taken into consideration with this was bringing the affiliates back in the fold and affiliate teams, how to get them to advance from the open to the next level. And I couldn't wrap my head around a way, because there was a lot of pressure not to do qualification process that had area representation, essentially, to kind of keep it free and open, especially from the top athletes. They really grew to like some of the things the sanctionals offered in terms of they can go to any event around the world. But I was having a hard time figuring out how that would be fair to affiliate teams and get them to wrap back in. And you know what, like when you look at any of these areas, when you look at, especially let's use South America as an example, those athletes are going to want to go to an event in their land with their fellow competitors and compete all against their athletes. They're not going to want a team from Cookeville, Tennessee, or from Gilroy, California, to come down and take a spot from them. And they shouldn't, and that shouldn't happen. So that was another piece. The affiliate aspect of it was another reason why area representation made a lot of sense.
Well, and I really like it because as far as parity goes, you know, you have teams that maybe luckily have a bunch of sponsors and they can afford to go to 10 different events. And then you have teams that are really good, but they can only afford to go to one event. And that event doesn't run or something like that. So I think as far as fairness goes, like you said, to all teams, all individuals, this makes a lot more sense.
Absolutely.
Anything else about the quarterfinals that you want to let us know before we finish our conversation?
No, I don't think so. I think that's it.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Dave. Thanks for shedding some light on the second portion of the Road to the Games.